The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated.
Welcome back to the Nova Society. I'm your host, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, and I'm here with my panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Mark Bount. Today we will be answering listener emails, and we have one from Olivia who lives in Baltimore, Maryland. And Olivia asks, Canada's Mark Carney says there is now an opening for negotiations in the Israel-Iran conflict. As scholars of conflict analysis and resolution, if there is a path, who would be involved and who would you automatically exclude? Question, Olivia.
I'm a little unclear about the nature of this question.
Well,
basically what she's asking is, okay, you guys are all supposedly experts at conflict analysis and resolution, mediation, negotiation, and things like that. Okay. If you were, Mark Carney says that there's a room for diplomacy here. You guys are supposed to be good with diplomacy. So who would you have involved and who would you say absolutely will not be involved in those negotiations?
But is this by country or by?
I believe it's by
personnel within the Trump organization.
No, I think you can exclude and include anybody you want, right?
I would think so.
Iran and Israel.
I would think so.
So Dennis Rodman is, yeah, for sure.
So I would say, I think we could all agree Putin probably shouldn't be involved.
Yeah, certainly the Israelis and the Iranians need to be included. You can't exclude the primary parties. Nobody from the Trump administration should be included. I would exclude them.
The one's going in, so somebody's going to go. Is Marco Rubio the chief diplomat of the United States? Does he do anything?
No.
He goes on TV and tells the TV host that forget about intelligence doesn't matter. That's his role.
He's really drunk the flavor of it. I don't really know if I'd want to include him. There doesn't seem to be anybody who is, can't we have could you have a senator?
All right. So let's try this.
How about John Kerry and Ernest Moniz?
And we know, we know Israel, we know Iran has to be involved. Let's just start with those two. Netanyahu, yes, yay or nay?
Nay. How about the president of Israel instead?
Okay.
Yeah, no Netanyahu.
All right, the Ayatollah?
No, he's 89 or something.
Whatever.
Yeah, they have it there, so.
Right. So, and since we are not experts on Iran, we're really not sure who we would put in there instead. Now, my question is, and again, Scott says nay to Netanyahu. But the president really doesn't have an awful lot of power.
Yeah.
Can't.
Well, this is a negotiation. They would have to go back. They would have to go back. You would want peaceful people involved in this. I think, people whose first instinct is to go to war. I don't think they make great diplomats. I gotta think that statement through a little bit, but
then the problem is,
Napoleon had his Talleyrand, right? It wasn't right. Napoleon who was going out there and doing the negotiating for peace.
Well, yeah.
The problem is, true. If you don't have the decision makers at the table, then they have to go back to their primary people and get the decision, and then that can really take a lot of time, and it can also, the person can reject a good agreement, and then you've got to go back. I think that, ideally, whomever is at the table should have decision-making authority.
It occurs to me that I wrote a paper that was published in the Conflict Resolution Journal, I believe, Mark, is whatever the name of that was.
It was.
About
GCIS.
bracketing for your own personal domestic whatever politics when you're entering into the foreign policy region, right? Just bracketing that and keeping it out of the way. And it probably applies to nations as well as political parties. But having somebody, so Obama sent John Kerry, as I said, and Ernest Moniz John Kerry always struck me as the kind of guy who would be a statesman, right? James Baker would have been that if you want to be, find a Republican to play that role for the Republicans, who did it really well. Some of the other George Shultz, right? Would have probably played that role. I don't want to go all the way back to Nixon, but obviously Kissinger, but here's the thing, like when Kissinger, Kissinger, as Brooke points out, you have to go back to your leader. Kissinger had a deal in 1971 as we headed into the 1972 election. Kissinger had finally struck a deal with the Vietnamese to end the Vietnam War. And Nixon, for the second time, killed that deal. The first time he did it because he didn't want LBJ to have an October surprise that would help Hubert Humphrey win the presidency in 1968. And so he got them to scotch that deal from the South Vietnamese side. And his chief diplomat, Henry Kissinger, actually got a deal that would have ended the war with honor. Peace with honor was Nixon's big mantra. And he killed it. And the reason he killed it was he was going into an election year and he didn't want to take foreign policy off the table. And if the Vietnam War ended, that would have meant that the real big issues for the election would have been domestic issues. And he was afraid that he had not paid enough attention to domestic issues and was not going to be the domestic issue president. And so he killed his own deal and allowed the war to go on for another few more years, even after Kissinger was had successfully negotiated an end to the war. So that's a cautionary tale that we need to be aware of. Hopefully that wouldn't be the case with Trump, because he's not going to run again at 79 years old and already in his second term.
No, but he's probably not going to leave office, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, that remains to be seen, whether we have a country or not. But, NATO was involved in this JPCOA negotiation, as well as Germany was added to the United Nations Security Council. And they were able to successfully negotiate a good, not a perfect deal. It didn't deal with Iranian proxies. It didn't deal with ballistic missiles. It didn't deal with a bunch of stuff that you would like to deal with. But because they focused on one thing and one thing only, nuclear power, nuclear bombs, they were able to be successful. That's the kind of focus that I think you need to get something like this done. And so the people that you would want in there are the peacemakers, people who know how to make peace. And they could be cynical bastards too. We're reminded of a line from Lawrence of Arabia: war has all the virtues of young men, courage and brave in battle, and peacemaking has all the vices of old men, cynicism and distrust of others. Great line from the old movie Lawrence of Arabia, my personal favorite. So, did we answer that question?
Yeah, I don't know. Mark, do you think we answered the question? Yeah, that's a very, very good question from Olivia.
Yeah, I don't know if you were paying attention to what went on with NATO, Brooke, but Trump has always had this wrong idea about NATO, right? As if it was an organization where everybody was at the table, the bill comes, and everybody's supposed to throw money in, and somebody's going to count it up and give it to the waiter, right? And that's not how it works.
I know.
And so he was complaining. And, he's not alone. Other presidents have complained about the defense spending being underwhelming. I think there was a question for a really long time whether we wanted a unified Germany to spend a lot of GDP on war making, right, because of the past.
Yep.
But in any event, they agreed that they were going to move from I think it was 3.5% to 5%.
Yes.
At this meeting. And do you have any idea how much the United States, with our massive economy, spending 5% instead of 3%? I think we were already above 4 or about 4. How much money that would cost taxpayers here in the United States?
Probably a couple of billion.
Yeah.
A couple of trillion. I'm not sure. Mark's Dr. Bound's computer has just decided that its lifetime of service has ended. So we wanted to thank Olivia for your question. I do hope we answered your question. I think that we didn't quite probably give you enough information probably that we were looking for, but we don't have Dr. Bound anymore. So we wanted to thank you and thank all our listeners for spending some time with us. We'd like to thank all of our subscribers as well for your continued support, and we appreciate that. If you are not a subscriber to the Nova Society on the platform that you listen to, please do subscribe. We really appreciate that. Keep your emails coming, and we will see you again next time on the Nova Society.
So the answer, by the way, is 500 billion a year, an additional 500 billion a year to move from 3% to 5% of defense spending for the United States. How do you like that?
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah,
that's a lot of money.
That's crazy.
I bet we're not. Of course, Trump hasn't said that we're going to increase our spending.
The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing partners, Apple iTunes, the largest source of podcasts and music on the internet, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your source for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. We'd also like to thank all of our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a question or comment, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So for Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power in society is knowledge. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next time.
Hi, everyone. This is JJ, the co-founder of Good Pods. If you haven't heard of it yet, Good Pods is like Goodreads or Instagram, but for podcasts. It's new, it's social, it's different, and it's growing really fast. There are more than 2 million podcasts, and we know that it is impossible to figure out what to listen to. On Good Pods, you follow your friends and podcasters to see what they like. That is the #1 way to discover new shows and episodes. You can find Good Pods on the web or download the app. Happy listening!